Welcome, chess enthusiasts, to another episode of Checkmate Chronicles, where we dive into the wonderful world of chess. I'm Dan, coming to you live from the Tactical Tower studio with a very special guest, joining us for 2 episodes on opening principles and an instructional game based around those principles. A chess instructor and a legend of Northern Connecticut Chess Club, Martin Caldon. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. So today we'll be going over quite a bit, opening principles, some terminology, as well as putting those principles to use in a practice game that you'll see next week.
A lot of people, they're asking me about openings, and I think a lot of chess instructors online, they say that at lower ratings we shouldn't even be studying openings. We shouldn't be memorizing openings that much, but instead learning the principles. And I do believe that to be true. There are a lot of opening traps that can be avoided, but let's talk about how we can just develop a strong, principled sort of opening without having to memorize too many lines. It's more about learning the ideas rather than memorizing specific things.
Right.
So, the first thing I'd like to talk about is controlling the center.
Okay.
This is a very important idea in the game where, if I may take these off.
Go ahead.
All right. So, people talk about controlling the center a lot and why that's important. So there's the direct center, and then there is, an extended center that is also important to take control of. Now, I think a clear example of why it's important to control the center. Imagine I can place this knight anywhere on the board. Oh, well, where are the best places for it? So let's say that this knight is in the center. Could you please place these pawns where the knight is able to move?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Keep them going. So that's perfect. In the center, from the center square, this knight can move to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different squares. A very useful knight in the center.
Right.
Now, instead, if we take that same knight and we move it to the side, or I've heard you say before, the rim, right?
Yeah.
And this is there's a popular saying that goes with that. Can you please place the pawns now on the squares that the knight can move to?
Already seeing a pattern here.
Mm-hmm.
Look
Right.
at that.
So now let's extend this even further, and let's take the knight and we'll put it right in the very corner of the board. Now where can the knight move to?
Oh boy, my goodness. Getting stuck here.
That's right. So when the knight was in the center, the knight was able to move to 8 squares. A knight on the rim, on the side, was only able to move to 4. And then in the corner, it can only move to 2. So when the knight is in the center, it's 4 times more valuable than it is when it's in the corner.
Right, wow, yeah.
The saying that we were speaking of the other day was knights on the rim are dim.
Right.
You've heard it right, knights on the rim are grim.
Yeah.
And it's cool that it works with both of them. Yeah, they say that knights on the rim are dim or grim because the knight, in this flank position is half as useful as it would be in the center. And that's not true for just the knight. Let's talk about the bishop instead. Now, we don't have to place pieces, but let's count how many squares this bishop can move to. So from this corner, it can move to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares. Let's take this same bishop, and we'll place it into the center now. Here it can move to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, those same 7 squares,
Right.
but with an additional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Wow.
So to go from 7 to 13, once again, it's almost doubled in value.
Wow.
That's why the first principle we're talking about is taking control of the center. Right, so for this reason, it's pretty typical where when people are beginning the game, they might begin with e4, perhaps d4. These are both very common, the 2 most common openings. And the reason for that is quite obvious, where we're moving a piece and that allows us, or moving a pawn, and that allows us to start taking control of the center. And in a perfect world, maybe we can get both of these pawns out, and now we have these 2 squares occupied, and then these 4, in the extended center, are all under our control. If we want to move one of our pieces here, it will be defended, and it will be in the center with maximum mobility. But also we are preventing our opponents from moving their valuable pieces here, and maybe causing them to have to be more in the back, more on the sides, where their pieces have less mobility.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's awesome. Sweet. So now, as far as moving forward, now would we start bringing out knights to defend those pawns, or do you prefer bringing out pawns to defend pawns?
I'm happy you asked. That actually leads into our next opening principle, which is to develop your knights and bishops early. Something I've noticed a lot when I'm playing beginner players is they realize how powerful the rooks are. And the rooks, they surely are more powerful than a knight or more powerful than a bishop. So many new players, what I see is they will begin with that, and then they want to bring their rook out because it is a strong piece, and it's also very easy to imagine the lines. It moves straight lines, very nice and simple in that way. But what you'll find is that in the beginning of the game, if you are bringing your rooks out too early, they'll often get trapped. And also, it's hard to navigate them because, for example, if I want to come here, it looks so close, but I still have to 1, 2.
Right.
If I want to come here, 1, 2, 3.
Wow, yeah.
Where if these pawns weren't here, all of a sudden it can be moving quite far, quite quickly.
Right.
So, for this reason, and many others, it's very good to be developing your knights and bishops early. Let's try to keep our more powerful pieces, our rooks and our queens, let's try to keep them out of the game until later. So, the knight is unique because, as we know, it can jump over pieces. And right from the very beginning, the knight can start taking control of the center. But the bishop doesn't have that luxury. And if we want to develop it into a place where it's starting to take control, then we do have to open up these diagonals by pushing pawns. Now, you asked before, if we want to defend these pawns, should we be doing it with knights or with bishops or with pawns? Well, I suppose it depends on the situation. But, of course, if we are able to be developing our knights and bishops, then that's a very good idea because they are very, they're powerful but also versatile pieces. And additionally, leading us into the third topic that I want to cover in these opening principles is castling. So, the idea of castling is at the beginning of the game, the king starts in a very vulnerable position. It's in the center, but also it's not only is it in a vulnerable position, but it's also sort of making the other pieces more clunky. Where these rooks, they're very powerful when they are connected, when they can see each other, because then they can protect each other.
Right.
But at the beginning of the game, they're as far apart as they can be. So, what castling is it is a way to not only bring your king out of the center and into safety, but it is a way to bring your rooks closer to each other so that they can start working together. So the way it works is if there are 2 empty squares, or if there are all empty squares between your king and your rook, then you may move your king over 2 squares, 1, 2, and you switch the rook to the other side. This is called kingside castling or short castling. I've heard both quite frequently. Now, this king is in a position where it is out of the center. Now the rook is protecting the queen and vice versa. But also, if we look at these squares here, the king and the knight are protecting the h2 square, and the rook and the king are both protecting the f2 square. So the king is actually in a much safer position now than it was before. This can also be done on the opposite side. So let's say that I've pushed this pawn, I've developed this bishop somewhere, and I've also developed this knight. The queen is still in the way, so I'll bring it here, for example. Once again, the king and the rook, there's no pieces in between them. And now I can move the king over 2 squares. switch the rook to the other side, and this is called queenside castling or long castling.
Wow.
There are a few stipulations, a few rules about castling that are very important to know, and that is you cannot castle into, out of, or through check. This might not be so clear, so let's get some of these pieces off the board so we can give a more clear example. Imagine we have this very simple board state. If our opponent moves the rook here, right now our king is in danger from the rook. We are in check. We cannot castle in this moment.
Right, wow.
Because we are in check. You cannot castle into, out of, or through check. So at this point, well, where can I go? Let's say I move here. Now that my king has moved, I will never be able to castle during this game.
Yep.
I have lost castling rights for the whole game. Better luck next time. Now, I said we cannot also castle through check. So let's say that instead, they have moved here. Now, this rook is attacking this square. So hypothetically, if I were to castle, I would have to move through that line of check.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess in a theoretical battle, as this king was moving, maybe the rook would attack.
Attack, yeah.
Yeah. So we cannot castle queenside. We cannot long castle in this position. However, we can castle kingside. And that's a nice way to bring ourselves into safety. But also, again, now our rooks are protected. So if I want to move here on one of my next turns and challenge this rook for the center, well, now I can do that. Something that I think isn't frequently talked about is these pawns and their positions. We say that every time you move a pawn, you create a weakness.
Okay.
These pawns here on the side, I think it's a good idea to try to keep them in their positions until you figured out where you want to castle. And once you have castled, try to avoid moving them.
Yeah.
Because they are, let's say I've castled on this side, they are the one thing that are really protecting my king. Now, for example, if I push this pawn, which can be good in some situations, don't let me say it's never ever good, but now this pawn is no longer protecting these two squares. It was playing a very valuable role of protecting these squares, but now once we push it here, I can no longer ever have one of my pawns protecting these squares again.
Right.
I can't move backwards.
Right.
So now these are permanent weaknesses on the board.
Interesting.
There's a checkmate that I've seen so many times, where maybe someone gets a pawn here and let's say their queen is here and they move like that. Well, now that's checkmate. And we've sort of allowed that because once we've pushed this pawn forward and this pawn moves here, well, now it's really difficult to get rid of. I can't move my king here to try to get rid of it because the pawn is attacking the square. So now my king is sort of pinned down, but there's also that opening for the queen to sneak in.
Nice, nice. So now that kind of brings me into my next point. As far as castling kingside, queenside, do you have a preference?
It's a good question. So let me talk about the sort of the strengths and weaknesses of each. Is when you castle kingside, we can see that the king is completely surrounded by our own pieces. It's very, very safe. Our rook is here. It's protecting the pawn, but it's not doing so much in terms of offense. If we castle queenside, 1, 2, swing the rook around. Now, our king, it's vulnerable along this long diagonal.
Right.
It's a little dangerous.
Right.
But also we see our rook is taking control of the center, that important file.
Right.
And remember that the queen starts on this, in this square.
That's true.
So sometimes you castle. Remember, this pawn has to be here because if it's not, then the queen would be
Right. Not
controlling
able
the square. We would
Right.
not be able to castle through. But now that we have this, now we have our rook on the same file as the queen. That can be a bit dangerous. It can be a bit complicated where we can start setting up interesting ideas.
Okay.
For example, imagine I want to move my knight here.
Uh-oh. Now we're seeing problems.
Right. And it can lead to many unexpected things for black, where now black would like to take this knight. However, this pawn is pinned. So let's talk a bit about pins.
Okay.
A pin is when there is a piece that is held in place because there's something more valuable behind it. So in this case, this pawn, who doesn't have a lot of value, is being pinned to the queen. This pawn cannot, well, it can, but it should not take this knight, because if the pawn moves now, this opens up the file and the rook can take the queen. So black says, oh, well, I took your knight. Well, I got your queen. So that's an okay trade for me.
Right. Poor pawn is just trying to do his job.
Yeah.
He didn't hurt nobody.
So you've asked me which side do I prefer to castle to. Very frequently, I will castle kingside. I think I can be a bit more of a conservative player. If I've determined that things are safe later on, perhaps I will try to push my f-pawn, which is something that I do advise against for many learning players,
Right.
Because it does open up this diagonal, and all of a sudden there are these ideas, attacking ideas.
Uh-oh, yeah.
Now, in this situation, someone might say, oh, well, no problem, you can just move this. But what we've overlooked is that this was actually a fork. You see that the queen is simultaneously attacking the king and then also attacking the pawn on b2.
Right.
So if we allow this move, I've just played f4, feeling very confident, a little arrogant perhaps. All of a sudden, now the queen can get me in this fork where she is attacking two pieces or creating two simultaneous threats. And when I do move out of the way, now she can win this pawn.
Very nice, very nice. All right. Join us in a few while we go over forks, pins, and more. See you soon. Welcome back, chess enthusiasts. Joining me again is Martin as we go over forks, pins, skewers, and a lot more. Let's get into it.
All right, let's start talking with forks. Now, a fork, just like the fork you eat with, it's multi-pronged. So a forked attack is when you are attacking multiple pieces or creating multiple threats at once. It's not always that you are attacking two pieces. Sometimes it can be more devious and more level than that. But let's start simple. Something very unique about the knight is that the knight is the only piece that can attack the queen while the queen cannot attack back. Any other piece, for example, the rook, if I move the rook to attack the queen is attacking my rook back.
Right.
So if I wanted to attack the queen with my rook, I would need some sort of support for that rook. For example, this pawn is supporting the rook, and now if the queen takes my rook, then the pawn can take the queen.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, the knight is different in that the knight, right now, it's attacking the queen, but the queen cannot attack the knight. For this reason, the knight can be a very useful tool in trying to take your opponent's queen.
Right.
Now, let us give an example of this fork. So here we see that if I move my knight here, my knight is now simultaneously attacking the king and the queen. The queen cannot kill the attacker.
Right.
The king cannot kill the attacker. You are in check. So black must move out of check. And then on our next turn, we've won the queen.
There you go.
Perhaps it would make more sense for black to move here. That's where they can at least take the knight at the end. But still, at the end, we have won a queen. Well, they've just won our knight. The knight is valued at 3. The queen is valued at 9. So that's a 6-point material gain we have just found.
Right. Now, just to kind of piggyback off that, now if we were to put the king and queen back in those positions with the knight, now let's say, put the knight here. Now let's say, for instance, the king says, oh, I wanted to attack that knight. Now it's kind of like a constant circular of attacks where the knight now takes, and now you're still in check, and you can keep kind of attacking the king all throughout while collecting pieces. That's why I love the knight. I mean, it's just so versatile and can keep attacking in all different positions. It's great.
It's very, very useful for that reason. Now, I want to give maybe a more advanced example of how a fork could look. So, in this position, let's say we have our knight here. In this position, we can create a sort of a unique sort of threat where I think when people are first learning forks, they think about, oh, how can I attack 2 pieces at the same time? And that's a good place to start. But then in this situation, we are attacking the rook, and this square here is also very valuable.
Right.
It's not that there's no piece here, but there is another threat here, where if I was allowed to move here on the next turn, all of a sudden I am creating this royal fork. I'm forking the queen and the king. So in this case, it's still a fork because I'm forking the rook and I'm forking the possibility of a fork.
Yeah.
Right. So if I were to do this, the rook can stop this by taking the knight, and I take the rook back, and now I'm up in exchange because the knight is worth 3, the rook is worth 5. So this was a good exchange for me.
Right, yeah.
Right. Okay. We had spoken a little bit about pins, but let me give another example. The example we gave before was with this, where when this rook is on the same semi-open file as this queen, there's no pawn here, just this one pawn here. Now this pawn is pinned to the queen. If this pawn were to move off of this file, then that would open up the file and the rook could take the queen. The example I gave before was like this. And now the knight can move here, mostly safely, because if the pawn moves off, then the rook can take the queen. So that's a pin, and that's it in its most simple form, but let's go a little bit more into that one as well. In many openings, we'll see that we get our bishop along this. The bishop starts, the white bishop starts on f1, and in things such as the Italian game, but many others, the bishop will move to c4, and that creates this pin on the castled king's f-pawn. The king feels very safe in here, but it actually has created some big weaknesses where, let's say they end up in a situation maybe like this. Now the queen can take this pawn, and the king is in danger. It looks like he could take back with the pawn, but this is actually not a legal move right now because that would open up check.
Right.
in our last example, the pawn could move out of the way. You lose your queen, but it's a legal move. In this case, it's not even a legal move at all.
Wow.
Very, very dangerous. Now, in this situation, we see that our queen is attacking all these squares. The king can't even move up here to protect the pawn. We can move the queen here now. That puts them in check again. And then, in many cases, maybe they want to do something like this. So because of that initial pin, there has been some major threats created.
Right.
Right.
Wow.
Someone might say, oh, well, right now we're threatening checkmate here. If they want to block, then maybe we could even move back again. And this queen is still, or this king is still in a very, very vulnerable position. Maybe they can block with the rook, but then again, we would be up in exchange, and the king is left wide open.
Right.
So it's not just that we're up this exchange here with the knight and the bishop, because we also collected these 2 pawns.
Wow, yeah.
So that's 5, 6, 7 to 3. I'll take that trade any day. So that's forks, pins, and then skewers. This is almost like the opposite of a pin. It is a pretty common endgame where at the end maybe you end up with kings and pawns, and then it ends up being like kings and queens. Maybe both people have promoted their pawns to queens. And a lot of people, they don't really know how they can handle this. It just seems like a drawn game. It seems like you're just going to eventually trade queens, end up with just kings, and then there can be no winner.
Right. Or repeat moves 100 times.
right, yeah, the other option. So in this position, if white were to move, white could actually win this game with a skewer. So in this case, we can move the queen here, and the queen is delivering check. This king has to move out of check, and as the king moves out of check, it will open up the file for this queen. So that's a prime example of a skewer where we've attacked a piece, and as that piece moves out of the way, a high value piece moves out of the way, then we're able to take whatever is behind it.
Nice. There we go. I always like taking free pieces.
Nothing better. So we can take like this, and now we can win this endgame easily.
Wow, look at that.
The Caro-Kann is a response to e4. So it's something that black can choose to play. And it is quite popular because Gotham Chess, who is the most popular chess streamer at this time, content creator, I should say.
Shout out to Gotham Chess.
He advocates for this Caro-Kann defense. And what's so funny is because so many of my own club members watch, our Gotham subscribers,
right.
So many of them play the Caro-Kann defense, and because so many of them play the Caro-Kann defense, I've had to learn so many different ways to attack it, where it's sort of good and bad that Gotham is so popular. He's an excellent content creator, but then I think he has a big effect on the meta of the game.
Yeah, right.
The more people that watch his videos, then the more people are playing his moves, but then the more people have to create counter moves. And if you Google, crush Gotham subscribers, there's so many videos like this, so many people trying to take advantage of people getting frustrated of losing to Gotham subscribers. So, e4, and this pawn move here, c6, this marks the beginning of the Caro-Kann defense.
Okay.
There are many different ways to respond to this, but one of the anti-Gotham subscriber moves is to go into the 2 knights attack. So then follows with d5, and this is pretty typical Caro-Kann pawn structure.
Right.
So this is just one possible line.
Right.
But I think it shows a lot of interesting sort of moves. So let's say they take, we take. One of the popular ideas is I believe it's perhaps not exactly the Tartakower variation, but it's something similar to it. And this is one of the lines that that Gotham does suggest.
Right.
Now, one of the popular moves to counter these people who have memorized the lines but don't really, they're just moving without thinking.
Right.
Is many people, they think, all right, well, I can't take the knight because the queen will take my knight back.
Mm-hmm.
But they also don't want me to take their knight and then maybe it will ruin their pawn structure.
Right.
So what seems like a pretty intuitive move is to bring the knight here, and now the knights are protecting. If I were to take this knight, then the knight could take back. The pawn structure is protected. They have a nice developed knight here.
Mm.
Everything looks great.
Even trade, right.
But
Uh-oh.
playing this move, this knight d7, is actually a huge blunder because that allows checkmate in one move.
Wow.
Pretty surprising. We're just a few
Yeah.
moves into the game and it's already checkmate. And I've won countless games using this
Wow.
this set of moves. Now, how is this checkmate? It's unbelievable that checkmate just happens like that. So, what is happening is our knight is attacking the king. And the king is completely surrounded by his own people.
Mm.
A smothered mate, we call this.
Right.
Now, normally, this pawn would, remove the threat, but it cannot because right now this pawn is pinned to the king. It is not a legal move for this pawn to take the knight because that would open up this file and allow me to take the king on the next move.
Right, wow.
Again, we're going into the two knights attack. Another one of the common lines is they take, you take back, and they develop their bishop here, attacking the knight. So I'll move here. Now I'm attacking the bishop. They can move the bishop back. That's actually, they want to try to keep it along this valuable sort of line.
Right.
And we can start to try to mess around with it. If we can push this next turn, it's protected, and there's nowhere the bishop can really move. We get to take it.
Mm.
So often people will play a move like that, trying to give an escape square for the knight, or not for the knight, for the bishop. And we can move here. We're attacking the bishop once again. Bishop moves back, just as planned. And now we can bring our queen here. This is looking very dangerous because right now we have checkmate in one.
Yeah.
And when I was talking about the opening principles before, it's really good to try to castle early because of this square specifically. This f7 square and also the f2 square for white. They are incredibly vulnerable squares. And I'm sure we've all been scholars mated at some point in our life where people will get their queen here defended on move 4.
Right.
You lose so suddenly and it feels bad.
Yeah.
So here we're threatening what's like a scholar's mate. And one of the moves to prevent it is to push this pawn, which doesn't feel great because we're blocking that bishop in now.
Right.
And what's pretty interesting is...
Uh-oh.
I've just sacrificed my queen, though, huh?
Right. But it's still, checkmate's more important, right?
Right, checkmate is more important. So if they take, then all of a sudden we have this checkmate here with the knight protecting the bishop, but also protecting that square. Now, there's a lot of things to sort of dive into here, but with all these things, it's really important that we are considering how the board is changing, thinking about the ideas of forks and pins and skewers. I grew up calling them spears. I think maybe incorrectly. I suppose it's all...
Same concept, though, right?
Right, right. All right, so in our last game, I'd shown how a pin can lead us to getting a checkmate in just 6 or 7 moves against the Caro-Kann defense. Now, I want to show you an example from one of the lines that I really enjoy that takes advantage of a fork very early in the game. Now, I'll open with e4, and if they respond with the most common response, e5, then I play the bishop's opening with bishop c4. This is the opening that's sort of advocated by my favorite chess content creator. Shout out to Grandmaster Igor Smirnov of Remote Chess Academy. And what's so nice about this is after e4, e5, the most common move by white is knight f3, which is an excellent move.
Right.
But the reason that I do not play this is that it can lead to many different variations, and you need to be prepared for a lot. For example, they might respond with knight c6, and then that could lead to, Italian sort of lines, Italian game. It can lead to the Roy Lopez, but also they might respond with knight f6 instead. And this is the Petrov defense, which is a game that I'm ill prepared for. I find it quite intimidating because I don't know these lines. I don't know the right way to approach these lines. It's so hyper aggressive. I like to just sort of set up and not have to worry about them coming in and scaring me like
Attacking
that.
early, right?
Right. So what I like so much about the bishop's opening, e4, e5, bishop c4, is that right away I've limited them to a certain number of reasonable moves, and then I don't have to memorize so much. I don't enjoy studying opening lines and memorizing opening lines. So this is a nice way to limit it. So after bishop c4, the top engine move is knight f6. And what's a little bit tricky that I like to play is d4 at this point, taking control of the center. I develop my bishop. I have a strong presence with my pawns here. And what many people will do is they will take with the knight here, which is, I'd say, a losing error. So after taking this, we can take back, and this pawn, it starts to control these squares that the knight might want to run away to.
Right.
After, perhaps they want to play here, and this is a tricky move by black, because what they're planning is they have their bishop and their knight aimed at this weak f2 square. Now, I said one of the important opening principles is to castle early and to try to keep these pawns stationary for the most part.
Right.
Now, a big reason for this is that these f2 and f7 squares are so vulnerable. I'm sure we've all had a game that we've lost in just 4 moves to the scholars made because we were careless and they were able to get their queen protected, taking that f7 square. Here they are threatening this fork here, and that's pretty dangerous. So what they plan to do, is to move their knight here, protected by the bishop, and now this knight is attacking our rook, is attacking our queen, and we can only save one of them.
Right.
Another possibility is maybe they will want to take with the bishop instead. And now, while they're not winning, while they're not forking us and winning material, they are putting us into check, and now we can no longer castle, and that's going to stunt the development of our rook.
Right.
Where now, if I want to get my rook into the game, I'm going to have to, move my knight, but then maybe move my king up, move my rook over, probably move my knight back.
Right, 15 extra moves, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Even though they're not winning material, it can still be quite annoying. So this looks like a very big threat, but then they're threatening this fork here, and we can actually respond with this counter fork.
Wow.
So here's this. Here we have this mating threat, where this is that, a scholar's mate sort of position, where my queen has attacked this weak f7 square, just like I was talking about, weak f2 square, weak f7 square.
Right.
Both of these squares are being focused on in this game.
Yeah.
And because the king cannot take the queen back because of the bishop, so because of this protected queen on the f7 square, that's checkmate.
Wow.
Now, not only is the queen threatening checkmate here, it's also attacking this knight.
Mm-hmm.
It's also attacking the bishop.
Right.
Now, this knight is protecting the bishop right now, but for us to fork these 3 different attacks, it's too late for black here. Black is already running into some trouble. So that's another example of how in just a few moves you can get into these 3-way fork where black has to make some very tough decisions and will end up losing some sort of material.
Wow, that seems like a challenging problem to have, and I don't know if I want to be in black's shoes right now.
Certainly not.